Kira. Thank you very much for joining us at TPN for this podcast, the latest in our series of podcasts where we talk to leaders about challenges of today. And there are significant challenges with which you are all too familiar, unfortunately. Let me ask you, if I may, first of all, why are you in Brussels this week and what are you hoping to achieve?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. So today is an important day because the initial goal was to meet with various members of European Parliament and leaders of their opinions here and talk to them about what is the plan, how are we going to act in the nearest months, what are the challenges that not only Ukraine is facing, but European countries are facing. And what is critical for me is how do we stay united? Because I truly believe that this winter will be a challenge, but it will also be a test for all European countries, including Great Britain and United States, of if we can stay together. Because Putin will definitely try to break us, and our goal would be not to let him succeed in this. Aside of this, today, my country was under 120 missiles attack, 12 regions, and right now there are at least 11 people killed, but and 60 wounded, but I believe there will be more. And what happened today is actually a question and an answer altogether. A question of what are we doing next and what is the response of the European Union and of all democratic countries to what happened, but also an answer to the question of would Putin stop? And the answer is not. And it's an answer of how he would act on or as a response to any resistance that Ukraine is making. And it's also an answer to a question, is peace possible? Which I also believe no.
Thank you. And let me and let us acknowledge that suffering today and generally, and let us communicate our best wishes to you and all of those people suffering as well. So before we go on, let's just be clear that we acknowledge that and hopefully can share a little bit in that with you. It's tough and we understand that. And I want to ask you, even with today's events, how do you read the current state of the war and the chances for peace?
So Ukrainian forces are pushing back Russians out of our territories for the last month and a half. We are actually doing something that nobody believed we are capable of, pushing Russian army back and freeing and liberating our territories. And we plan and want to continue doing that because our strategic goal is to regain as much territory as possible before the winter hits. In winter in Ukraine, it will be almost impossible to fight. This is why it will be easier for us to defend and protect our territories. And actually for the people who live on those territories, we will be able to ensure their safety. We have had a couple of very successful operations in terms of destroying Russian infrastructure that was used to attack us. And nor confirming nor denying the explosion on the Kerch Bridge. I can say that Kerch Bridge was built on annexed territory that was illegally annexed and was used to provide weapons and supplies to the south of the Ukrainian front. And it was critical to stop the supplies, to be able to regain our territories in the south. So this is the first part of the State of the Union. The second part is, I'm sure all of you have read in the news that Putin is gathering his forces in the north, in Belarus, and probably the main question of of the next couple of weeks would be, would he pressure Lukashenko enough that he will actively be engaged in the war? Beforehand, Belarus was just a territory for Russian missiles to be fired from, and he was basically trying to balance in between not getting into the war actively, but also playing around with Putin and shaking his hand. Right now, the pressure is significant, and we see that there is more and more forces gathered on our northern borders, which are like 2-hour drive from Kiev. And this is why Ukrainian forces are preparing, mining the roads and exploding the bridges, because we think the threat is real. And the third question that I'm sure we'll be talking about is, of course, the nuclear threat. The nuclear threat is something that have been hanging onto above our heads for a while. And right now, the whole world acknowledges that the threat is real. And the question that nobody has an answer to, like, then what?
Exactly. And none of us does have an answer to that question. We have hopes, of course, that somehow, somewhere, there is a path that can be discovered. But it does not look easy to find that path as we speak. So we can live in hope. Let me ask you, Kiri, you are a legislator. Before that, you were a distinguished and successful entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about how it is to be a legislator during wartime. What changes, what stays the same, if anything? Tell us about that.
So, nobody is trained to be a member of parliament at war. And you just have to help your country to adjust to the wartime. Ukrainian parliament is working, though we are working in the secrecy because of the security threat. But we started working at the day one of war, of invasion, and we had about 30 sittings since that time. It's a very emotional story that I want to share with you on the day one of war. It was 5 a.m. in the morning when the first rockets hit Kiev, and we all woke up and realized that the war started. And the first thing that Ukrainian parliament has to do during the war is to vote for the martial law to start. The limitations of Ukrainian constitution are saying that we have to gather inside the parliament and nowhere else. And we have to vote with the majority of the votes. And you can imagine the country at the day one of war. You can imagine the city under the bombarding, and people being in such a distress, trying to figure out what to do with their families, where to run, where to hide. And so myself and other party leaders, we were calling each other, thinking of how are we going to gather people and what we are going to do if people wouldn't come, if there would be enough MPs to vote for the martial law, because it's a key thing that announces mobilization and gives the power to the military and basically switches the country from the peace to wartime. And we were calling our MPs and we were announcing that we very secretly that we will be gathering in the parliament at 7 a.m. We didn't know if people will be able to get there because there was a transport collapse, obviously. And our security were saying, absolutely not, like the worst idea. I can tell you, Ukrainian parliament is located at the center of the huge park. So basically, if you're a Russian pilot, it's just like saying, when you're flying over, it says, hit me. So so our security said that we'll have 10 minutes inside the parliament. And then they said, we don't care what you will be able to do during this time, but this is what we can promise you, that is fairly safe. But it was incredibly scary. So our main question was if people will come and if they will be able to fulfill on their duty. And so it was time 7 a.m. and we got into the parliament. There was many military there, and all the windows were covered with the bags of sand. And we didn't turn on the lights because not to show that we are inside. Many people were wearing already military uniform because they were getting into the front right from there. And when we appeared in the sitting room, in the chambers, we looked around and we have seen that of 420 members of parliament, 400 came. And we were extremely scared, I can tell you without like any doubt, and everybody was scared. And we were keeping very close to each other because we didn't know what's going to happen, and the explosions were going and on and on and on. We could have heard it. And for the 10 minutes when we were pushing our buttons as hard as possible, we were singing national anthem. For two reasons. First, to show our nation that when our soldiers will be fighting, doctors will be curing, and teachers will try to teach under the bombs and save children, we will be fulfilling on our duty. And we were, and we did what we had to do. And that was also a moment that was incredibly emotional, where we made a vow in between party leaders and political parties that we will try to stay united for as long as it will be possible, no matter how painful it will be for us politicians. And we are 8 months at war, and I can tell you one thing, it is incredibly painful. But you wouldn't hear me or anybody else saying, oh, I'm in opposition and this is what is not going right. We are all Team Ukraine. And all the discussions and fightings we are doing behind the scenes, and they're like, it's like very like, but when we go out to our people or to international community, we stand together, same as our people are standing together. So a couple of things on legislative part, because emotional things are, you go with what is needed. So whatever comes from military, you fulfill almost without the questions. There is a direction that where we had to ensure that all the international support goes into Ukraine, like without any obstacles and blockades. Also, we had to adjust our budgeting. Obviously, Ukrainian budget has $5 billion gap every single month, and it's like we only survive by the international support. But there are things that you never predict that you will be doing. Like, for example, we had to have a legislation to push local councils to allocate land for the graveyards. This is something local council never wants to do, and you have to force them to. We had to figure out a new entity, which is called the child of war, for children who have no parents, no paperwork, and nothing. We had to figure out how to pay people for their unemployment rates when they have no paperwork and like nothing at all. And this is where actually digitalizations came in place. One of the things that I'm extremely proud of is DIA. This is services of the government that are in your phone, and they're fully digitalized. This is my committee of digital transformation and Ministry of Digital Transformation have worked with, and this has been like a real lifesaver, because when people had to run from their homes with nothing with them, they still had their passport in their phones, and they still have their driver license in their phones. They still had the most important, probably the children's birth certificate in their phones. And this is what was helping out when they were crossing the border. And this is what helping out when we had to give them some payment. So it had to, legislatively, we had to push our country to like completely different level in all matters, starting from digitalization and then to an ability to supply army. And the budget that we have for the next year, it's like 55% of everything that we have will go to defense and security.
So this is definitely not business as usual.
Absolutely not. It's an opposite.
It's exactly the opposite. Let me ask you to switch to two other legislatures, the legislature in the US, the Congress, the US Congress, and back to Brussels, where you are today. You were in Washington in the summer, and as we know, you're in Brussels today. What's your sense on two questions? One, how is support holding up for the efforts that you have described and the struggle that you have underway? That's my first question. How is support holding up in Washington and Brussels as far as you're concerned?
So the support holds still, though we need it to increase. And this is probably the honest answer that I can give you. We know that the problem of the modern democracies is that they are very much concentrated on the domestic issues and less looking up, quoting the famous movie. So in the United States, the support for Ukraine in terms of finance and weapon supplies have been going on, and everything that that was, on the line of just like supporting us to fight, we receive. But what we, for example, need is acknowledging Russia as state sponsor of terrorism. And we know that that's not going to happen soon because of the midterms that are in the United States right now. And same in Brussels. European countries are supporting us, like some supporting us very well, some supporting us less than we would want to. And there is obviously some fatigue. But what we anticipate is that there would be a way to increase the support, because as you have seen today, whatever weapons and whatever supplies we're having, it is not enough, because we're using them every day. Same as our refugees have to eat every day. Same as our budget has to be filled in every month. And this is something extremely frustrating, that this fatigue, it's being added. And this is why actually I started working on the project with Bill Browder on unfreezing Russian assets and using money to support Ukraine, because we know that at some point people will start being I wouldn't say upset, but will start being concerned about their own well-being. And this is the moment where politicians should stand up and say, look, we don't want you to pay for Putin's misdeeds. Let Putin pay. Let's take the assets of Russian bank, let's take the assets of Russian oligarchs and use them to support Ukraine instead of getting into your pockets. So this is the plan. However, it's also like in works right now.
Thank you very much. And you were looking forward then a little bit. And let me ask you, looking forward, about reconstruction. I know that's difficult when really the effort is to avoid destruction, the destruction of every day, and that must be a pressing concern. But can you think forward and tell us anything about what could be the key stages in a reconstruction effort for Ukraine, and also who the key players are and should be and will be in that reconstruction effort?
So there are two aspects here. First aspect is the best investment in reconstruction of Ukraine is sending us weapons, because that will be less to reconstruct. And I'm saying it not for the again, propaganda matters, but it's like logical point. If we have talked with you yesterday, Ukraine would have had, I don't know, like what, at least 10 electrical stations more than we have today. So the amount of support that we needed yesterday, before Russia destroyed our energy stations, was like a couple of 100 millions less. And today we need more of that. So again, the best investment would be into the weapons and Air Force protection systems, which again would be able to help us in a major way. Second point is reconstruction needs to start already. And this is one of the key matters of the discussion with people who are saying, okay, let's end the war and then we will come and help you out. Well, no, the winter is coming and Ukrainians will need to places to live, will need our various systems fixed, and whatever needs to happen needs to happen while the war is going on, because we honestly do not know when it will end. And the risks are high, but of course, there is, like, again, the risks are high, period. There is nothing we can do with Was that aside of getting us the Air Force protection systems? So third, the key players. Of course, there are two or maybe three highest demands that are in Ukraine right now in terms of rebuilding. First is the roads. Roads were majorly destroyed, and including destroyed by Ukrainian army to stop Russians from attacking. Second is a temporary building and rebuilding of the households. So I cannot begin to explain you how high is the demand for the temporary, quickly assembled homes is. And there are obviously issues with communication on that and investments going in, but this is something that we critically need. And the third is, of course, infrastructure that is majorly destroyed, starting from all the energy and electricity stations, then to critical infrastructure, and of course almost all our airports are destroyed. Our ports will need significant rebuild, and if airports cannot be rebuilt right now, the roads can be and should be, and same as energy stations, same as other critical infrastructure items. And this is what will the rebuild look like. Important point is that right now, and there was like one significant positive change that happened during the last 8 months. We have fought and received the candidacy status to the European Union. And I was here in Brussels for the day, and if you hear about a crazy woman running around the European Commission screaming, "Yay, Ukraine," it may or may not be me. But it was a fantastic change, and it is something that gives us a hope that we will create a setup so the international companies, European companies, will be coming to Ukraine and will be taking part in the rebuild on the fair rules, so that these processes of Ukrainian integration into the EU, involvement of European companies in the rebuild, and having the correct legislation for all of that, these processes will be, in parallel. Because one of the concerns, and we are talking about it openly, is that when the companies are and the countries are donating money for the rebuild, is how they will be spent and how and which providers they will be used for, right? And we all know that everybody's looking at the war as, and everybody remembers the war as a time as the fortunes were built, right? But we do not want for the fortunes to be built. We want our country to be rebuilt in the most effective and efficient way. And this is the main goal right now. And this is why I do believe strongly that for us to avoid all those unnecessary complaints about potential corruption or misuse of the money that are right now being allocated for the rebuild of Ukraine, is to make sure that the market is open for everyone.
And you can imagine, Kira, that as a transatlantic network, we've already begun to talk about how US and EU collaboration and cooperation on building that path is important and must be a priority of policymakers, both in the US and the EU, to make sure that not only that they can encourage the investment, but they can align the investment in the most effective and helpful ways. So you can be rest assured that those are conversations that in our networks we're already have underway. Just moving on, as we move towards the time where you need to go, we've taken so much of your time, for which we're very grateful. Two more questions. One really which goes to the issue of NATO, and I'll put it this way, that on the 30th of September, President Putin annexed, as he put it, 4 regions of the Ukraine in a way that many described as through sham referenda. But on the same day, President Zelensky talked about an accelerated path to Ukraine's NATO membership. What's your sense on how the people in the Ukraine saw that and see that? and assess those hopes or expectations around NATO membership. You talked about EU membership, but NATO membership is even more sensitive if you want.
So, first of all, membership in EU and membership in NATO is something that is written in Ukraine's constitution. So this is the will of Ukrainian people and the direction for the country that we all agree on. And this is fantastic because at some point it became sort of like a part of the everyday life that we know this is where we are going to. And I can tell you with the EU, Ukrainian soldiers, they had on their backpacks both Ukrainian and EU flags. And this was one of our threats. If we wouldn't get a candidacy, like what we would tell our military, that they were waving the wrong flags, that doesn't want them. So it's same with NATO. They are right now trained by NATO countries. They receive the NATO grade weapons. And we know that we are fighting very much within the NATO standards. And so there should be like a good emotional reason. And I will start first as a citizen of Ukraine. There should be like a very good emotional reason why saying no to Ukraine. Then I know that there are many political reasons and there are many obstacles in that. However, 11 countries as of right now stood up and said, we support Ukraine's aim to join NATO, and we will support this attempt. So this is exactly what happened with the candidacy, because at the very beginning, first, nobody believed that we will get them. We will offer it some different options of having partial candidacy or something, and we said no. We want it for real. And at the very beginning, there was very small amount of countries who supported us, many who said, yeah, next time, and some who were actually objecting. So same is right now with NATO, and we actually know how to work it through. So we know that you just go step by step, country by country, leader by leader, persuading up until there is a small amount of the last resort left, and then you try to persuade them as well. So it was pure diplomatic work that has been done, I think, fantastically from our side. And I do believe on the NATO, it will be much more complicated because of the rules of the alliance, but second, because of Ukraine being at war. But what I truly believe is that at the point where everybody will believe that we are winning, we will get into the NATO, because everybody will want to be a part of the victory, of this victorious story. Right now, there are still concerns from different leaders of different countries who still do not believe that we are definitely going to win this war. And I think this is one of the, again, emotional and political stopper, because organizationally, look, we are right now opposing what was known the second strongest army in the world, which turned out to be a second strongest army in Ukraine.
Thank you. One final question. As you know, often in the West, we see Russia's invasion and the war as a direct challenge and threat to democracy and the liberal value system that we all believe in and hold dear. Do you recognize that part of your own struggle? Do the people see that struggle, a struggle not just for defense of territory and people, but also for democracy and values? Is that something that people think about, or is it a luxury that we can't afford at the moment?
The first thing that we realized was that we are fighting for the thing that we thought that we have for granted. This is an ability to define your own future, which is basically the freedom. But this, you can feel it on your, as a taste of it, when you are being threatened that it will be taken from you. And then there was this fantastic example that I love. So at the very beginning of the war, the temporary occupied territories, Russians were doing this political thing when they would kidnap a mayor of the temporary occupied village or city and would say, okay, this is your new mayor. And they were so surprised why it didn't work. And Ukrainians were so surprised there are countries where it could potentially work, because we have those unpleasant word institutions that everybody wants to build, but everybody hates because it's so boring. But it did not work because this like so-called mayor would come to work and people would not obey. The doorman wouldn't open the door for him. He said, like, where is your key card? We are all using the key card. And the key, he said, well, what do you mean? He said, like, well, even to log into the water supply system to switch the water, you have to have your ID and password, and you have to receive it from Kiev. And there are procedures of what you can or cannot do. And like, who are you? You don't have a stamp and the seal, and like, we did not elect you. And Russians were so surprised why it didn't work, because I suppose like this is something that works very well in Russia, saying, here is your boss. And in Ukraine, it just didn't work. They had to go a different way. And they actually, this is why they returned our kidnapped mayors, because like there was nothing that they can do. And this is, I think, the moment where we understood that there's like a huge difference in between Ukraine and Russia, not only historically, culturally, but also in the matter that we already have built so much, and we already treasure so much our ability to be independent, to have this liberty, and to have the democracy as it is. And so every single moment when we are fighting, we know that we are fighting because we are part of this democratic world, because we are much, 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 much closer with our European neighbors than with Russia, no matter what Russia is trying to persuade us at. And you know, probably the best thing of all of that is that people who even had in their minds that, oh, the democracy is this and that, or like, oh, we could have done better maybe if we had like a strong hand, they right now have seen how much the decentralization and an ability to people to make their own choices works better against the tyranny. Because this is why we are standing. And I insist and will be insisting that Kyiv was not conquered because at the moment where nobody knew what to do, people were organizing in the small groups and saying, okay, this is our city, this is our territory, we will get whatever guns we have and we'll go and protect it. And this is what was happening everywhere in Ukraine. And this is what I'm extremely proud of.
Kira Rudik, thank you very much for joining us. And all our wishes go with you in the challenges that you face ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.